Commander Ethan Hayes had spent years in cold darkness, moving from star to star, completing humanity's first peaceful contact mission. And now at last his work was finished. And for the first time in a long time he allowed himself to imagine Earth, the blue oceans, the warm sunlight, the voices of his people, and that tiny memory of home warmed him inside, making him feel human again after too many silent nights. And as his ship drifted near the pale moon on the edge of unknown space, he felt tired in his bones, the kind of tired that was not only physical but heavy in the heart, and he whispered to himself that soon he would be going home. Soon he would see familiar skies. Soon this lonely chapter would end. But just as his ship began the return sequence, a sharp alarm cut through the quiet cockpit. A strange signal pushing against his systems. A signal unlike anything his ship had ever recorded, and at first he thought it was an error. Some glitch caused by old machinery. But then, the signal grew stronger, heavier, like invisible hands gripping the ship, forcing it to stop, and Ethan frowned, checking the scanners, trying to understand why a simple frequency could hold back a military vessel. And as he looked at the readings, his heart tightened, because the scanners detected something rising from the dark side of the moon, something massive and silent, shaped like a fortress carved from stone and metal. Yet it emitted no known energy signature, no beacon, no language, no record in the entire galactic archive, and this silence was more terrifying than any threat, because things that big were never quiet unless they were hiding, and the fortress continued to rise, towering higher and higher until it blocked the stars themselves, like a shadow swallowing the universe, and Ethan leaned forward, breath trapped in his chest, staring at the impossible structure, his ship trembling as if even the engines feared this new presence. And when he scanned the fortress for life, he expected a crew, a military force, a swarm of alien beings, but instead the scanners showed only one life form, a single presence inside that fortress. But the energy levels were beyond reason, beyond calculation, beyond any known life form in the galaxy, and Ethan felt a cold shiver slide down his spine because something with power like that was not simply alive, it was dominant, ancient, and waiting. And suddenly the massive doors of the fortress began to open, metal plates sliding apart with slow, thunderous movement, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, and Ethan watched the darkness inside stretch outward, a void so deep it felt endless. And then out of that darkness a figure appeared, tall, graceful, and terrifying, stepping forward like a queen descending a throne. Her body shaped like a humanoid but taller, more elegant, with silver armor that shimmered like stars and eyes that glowed with bright, intelligent fire. And she walked with calm steps as if she belonged to every inch of space around her, as if the galaxy itself was her domain, and Ethan felt his heartbeat pounding, not because she looked monstrous, but because she looked powerful, confident, and aware, and the most frightening thing was that she was staring directly at his ship, staring as if she knew him, as if she had been waiting for him specifically, and Ethan whispered, How does she know I'm here?" Even though no one could hear him. And as she raised one hand, everything inside the ship reacted instantly, every engine froze, every weapon locked, every communication signal died, screens went black, lights flickered out, leaving only a dim emergency glow, and the silence that followed was not peaceful but suffocating, like the ship had been buried alive, and Ethan's fingers shook as he tried to override the shutdown, pressing buttons, flipping switches, calling for command protocols. But nothing responded, nothing moved, as if his ship had become a dead shell in the middle of space. And then the strangest thing happened, something impossible, something terrifying. He heard a voice, not through speakers, not through radios, but inside his mind, clear and echoing. A voice that did not come from technology but from a living presence. And the voice spoke a single sentence, slow and cold, "Human, you cannot leave." And Ethan jerked back in shock, eyes wide, breath shaking. Because he had not opened any mental channel, he had not accepted telepathy, and yet something had reached into his thoughts, something that knew what he was, something that spoke to him like a command from a higher power. And he realized in that instant that this queen, this alien ruler, had control beyond anything humans understood, and fear began to crawl through his veins, fear that he had found something humanity was never meant to see, something ancient that had waited in silence for a reason. And Ethan tried again to fight the shutdown, but the controls remained dead, the engines remained frozen, and the ship began to drift, helpless, trapped in the grip of the fortress, and Ethan felt the crushing weight of isolation. The knowledge that no one knew he was here, No one knew what he was facing, and no one could help him. And the Queen stood there, unmoving, watching him with eyes that seemed to see through the metal walls, through his body, straight into his soul. And Ethan wondered if she had been watching humanity for years. If she knew things humans had forgotten, if she held secrets that could break worlds, and the longer he stared, the more he felt she was not simply blocking his return. She was preventing something far greater from happening, something tied to him, to Earth, to all of humanity, and the mystery wrapped around him like chains, heavy and cold, and his thoughts raced with questions that had no answers. Why him? Why now? How did she know his name? And what did she mean when she said he could not leave? And, as that silent fortress loomed over his disabled ship, Ethan understood one terrifying truth. His mission was not over, it had never truly ended, and whatever waited inside that fortress was about to change everything humanity believed, and the fear, the suspense, the shock of that moment tightened around his chest, because for the first time since he left Earth, he felt that going home might not be possible, and he whispered into the dark cabin, voice trembling, "Who are you?" But the Queen gave no answer. She only stood, tall and silent, as if she held the power to decide the fate of a species, and Ethan felt a single thought echo inside him. This was not an encounter. This was a trap, and the real mission was only beginning. Ethan sat frozen in the dim red emergency light, his chest tight, his breath uneven, feeling like the walls around him were closing in, and for a moment he wasn't a commander or a trained explorer. He was just a human who wanted to go home, who had dreamed of stepping onto Earth's soil again, smelling real air, hearing familiar voices, and that simple dream now felt like it was slipping away, falling into darkness as the silent Queen outside watched him like a judge waiting for a verdict. And he felt a strange ache in his heart, a mix of fear and sadness, because he had promised himself that after this mission he would visit his family. He would stop living in empty corridors and metal halls, he would finally rest, but now it felt like someone had ripped that future away from him without warning. And as he tried to steady his shaking hands he spoke softly into the quiet cabin, telling himself he had to stay calm, he had to think, but every second he glanced at the Queen through the viewport he felt her eyes pulling at him, as if she could feel every thought, every doubt, every fear, and suddenly his mind filled with a strange pressure, like a cold wind pushing against the inside of his skull. And then her voice returned, softer but deeper, echoing in his mind, "Human, you do not understand your danger." And Ethan flinched, his heart hammering, because the voice wasn't angry, it wasn't violent, it sounded almost sorrowful, like she didn't want this, like she wasn't doing this out of cruelty, and that emotion made everything more terrifying, because if someone with that much power felt fear or sadness, then the threat must be far worse than anything he could imagine, and Ethan swallowed hard, whispering back even though he didn't know if she could hear him, "I just want to go home." And for a moment there was silence, heavy and endless, and then the Queen's voice filled his mind again, "If you leave, your home dies." And Ethan's breath broke, a sharp pain hitting him in the chest, because the thought of Earth in danger, the planet he loved, the people he cared for, billions of lives unaware of anything beyond their sky, was unbearable, and he felt a wave of protectiveness surge through him, stronger than fear, stronger than confusion, and he clenched his fists, whispering, "Why? What danger?" But she did not answer immediately, she simply lowered her hand, and the fortress behind her pulsed with a slow glow, like a heartbeat from something ancient and alive, and Ethan felt the ship jolt as if pulled closer, dragged toward the towering gates, and panic rose inside him, raw and helpless, because he wasn't choosing this, he wasn't ready, and he felt like a prisoner, like a child standing before something far older than time, and his mind raced with memories of Earth, blue oceans, crowded cities, laughter, childhood, sunlight, all the things that made life worth living. And the idea that some unseen threat could erase all of it made him feel a deep, aching sorrow, as if he was already losing everything, and tears stung his eyes, not from weakness but from the weight of responsibility crushing him. Because in this moment he was alone, no fleet, no command, no backup, just one human against a force he couldn't understand. And the Queen spoke again, her voice softer, almost gentle, "You carry something inside you, something awakened by your mission." And Ethan shook his head, confused, frightened, whispering, "I'm just a man." But the Queen's reply struck him like a blade, "You are more than you know." And as the fortress doors opened wider, revealing a vast inner glow like stars trapped in stone. Ethan felt his ship being drawn inside, powerless to resist, and a heavy realization settled in his heart. His life was no longer his own. His future was no longer simple, and the path back to Earth, to peace, to home, was gone, replaced by a dark unknown he had never asked for. And as the ship crossed the threshold into the fortress, Ethan's eyes burned with fear and silent emotion, because deep inside he understood something terrible and true. Whatever waited beyond those gates was tied to him, to humanity, and to a fate he could not escape, and in that crushing moment he whispered to himself, voice breaking, "Please, don't let Earth pay for this." Knowing that whatever happened now would decide the future of everyone he loved as the ship drifted deeper into the glowing fortress, Ethan stood from his seat, legs weak, heart pounding like a drum trapped in a cage, and every step he took toward the viewport felt heavier, as if the air itself was turning thicker, pressing against his chest, reminding him that he was walking into something meant for beings far greater than him. And as he stared at the endless chamber ahead, lit by swirling lights and towering walls carved with symbols he didn't recognize, he felt a painful truth settling inside him, a truth that made his throat tighten. He was not in control anymore, he was not choosing his path, he was being pulled into destiny by a force that already knew far more about him than he knew about himself, and that helplessness stung like a wound, because all his life he had worked to earn his place, to build his future, to make his mission count, and now it felt like everything he believed about his own story was too small, too fragile, too blind to understand what he truly was caught in. And as the ship finally stopped in the center of the chamber, a low vibration hummed through the floor, making Ethan's bones tremble, and the Queen's voice slid into his mind again, colder this time, deeper. "Human, you were not supposed to awaken this." And Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, breath shaking, whispering, "Awaken what? I didn't do anything." But he felt tears burning behind his eyes because a part of him feared that maybe he had done something without knowing. Maybe his mission wasn't peaceful at all. Maybe he had triggered something catastrophic, and that guilt tightened like a fist around his heart, making him feel small and scared, and suddenly a wall in front of him began to shift, splitting apart with ancient grinding noise, revealing a massive chamber filled with floating holograms of galaxies, stars, and battles long forgotten, scenes of destruction, worlds burning, fleets shattered like glass, and at the center of it all stood a colossal statue. Humanoid, armored, powerful, unmistakably human. And Ethan staggered back, eyes wide, breath trapped in his throat. Because the figure was not a myth, not a guess, it was human, undeniably human, and the Queen's voice echoed again, full of sorrow, "Your kind once ruled war." And Ethan shook his head violently, whispering, "No, humanity never, we're explorers, we're builders, we're peaceful." And he thought of Earth, of children running in parks, of scientists laughing in labs, of families living simple lives, and the idea that humans were once something violent, dominant, terrifying crushed him emotionally, because he didn't want to believe that his species had a past soaked in blood. He didn't want to believe that the world he loved was born from war, and he whispered again, weaker, "That's not who we are." But the Queen replied, her voice trembling with something that felt painfully real, "It is who you were, and it is what you will become if the enemy returns." And Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, because she wasn't threatening him, she was warning him about something so ancient and terrifying that even she feared it. And he realized she wasn't his captor. She was his barrier, his shield, the last line between humanity and a nightmare hidden in the stars. And that realization made his chest ache with confusion and helpless sorrow. Because everything he had ever learned, everything humanity believed about its peaceful rise into the galaxy, was just a surface story hiding a buried truth. And the Queen stepped forward, her eyes glowing more brightly, and for the first time Ethan saw something unexpected in them. Not anger, not pride, but grief, deep grief, like someone who had watched worlds die and carried the weight of every loss, and she spoke softly. "The ancient war erased your history to protect you, to let humans live as children, free of memory." And Ethan felt his knees weaken, because the thought of humanity living in ignorance, believing it was small and new while its true past was vast and violent, filled him with a heartbreaking mix of sadness and fear, and he whispered, voice breaking, "Why hide it from us?" And the Queen's reply was like a quiet dagger. "Because once humans remember what they were, they will never be the same." And Ethan closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek, because he suddenly understood the crushing emotional weight of this truth. He was not just trapped in a fortress, he was standing at the edge of humanity's lost identity, a past that could destroy everything innocent and beautiful about Earth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan wasn't afraid for himself, he was afraid for who humanity might become, afraid that the return of this forgotten truth could break the very soul of his people. And as the chamber lights pulsed like a heartbeat, rising and falling, he felt something shift deep in his own mind, a strange pressure, a distant memory that didn't belong to him, like a voice whispering from thousands of years ago, and Ethan's breath hitched in terror, because it felt like something ancient inside him was stirring, something buried in his blood, and he whispered with trembling fear, "What did I awaken?" Knowing that whatever the answer was, it would change everything forever. Ethan's fingers dug into the edge of the console as that strange whisper inside him faded, leaving his mind cold and trembling, and he stared at the towering statue, trying to breathe, trying to convince himself that this was all some illusion, some malfunction. But deep in his chest he knew it was real, painfully real, and that truth made his heart feel heavier than space itself, because he wasn't just looking at a relic, he was looking at proof that humanity had lived a life it didn't remember, a life built on violence and power, and the idea hit him like a punch. What if humans were never meant to be peaceful? What if they were only sleeping, waiting for something to wake them? And that thought terrified him so deeply that he had to put a hand over his heart just to steady himself, whispering, "I don't want this. I don't want any of this." Because all he ever wanted was to serve, to explore, to come home, not to carry the weight of forgotten wars, not to be part of a destiny soaked in blood. And suddenly the Queen appeared before him, not walking, but materializing like a ghost from light itself, her presence strong and silent, and Ethan stumbled back, fear tightening in his throat. But she lifted one hand gently, not to threaten, but to stop him from falling, and for the first time her voice didn't echo like thunder, it sounded almost human, soft with something that felt almost like pity. "You fear what you do not understand." And Ethan's voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm afraid of what it means." Because deep inside he felt something broken, something fragile, like the life he knew had shattered into pieces he couldn't put back together. And the Queen lowered her gaze, her expression heavy with ancient emotion, and she spoke slowly. "The galaxy fears humans for a reason," and Ethan felt his stomach twist, because he didn't want to be feared, he didn't want Earth to be seen as a monster, and he thought of the children on Earth, of families, of people who laughed and cried and dreamed, and the idea that the galaxy saw them as a threat felt unbearably cruel, and he whispered, "We're not killers, we're not monsters." But the Queen shook her head slightly, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Once, your kind conquered entire star systems. Once, the galaxy knelt to human will." And Ethan's eyes burned with disbelief and pain, because that image, humans ruling with force, felt wrong, felt ugly, felt like a nightmare he didn't want to belong to, and he shook his head again and again, whispering, "No, that can't be us, that can't be who we were." But the Queen raised her hand and the chamber shifted, symbols glowing brighter, and images began to appear all around him. Armored humans standing tall on burning worlds, massive human warships crushing fleets, battles where human eyes burned with cold purpose, and Ethan's legs nearly collapsed as the reality hit him like a weight he couldn't hold, tears blurring his vision. Because this wasn't pride, this wasn't glory, this was horror, destruction, the death of countless lives, and he felt his chest ache so deeply it hurt to breathe, whispering, "Why would we ever do this?" And the Queen's voice trembled. "Because your ancestors believed survival required domination. Because fear shaped them into weapons." And Ethan wrapped his arms around himself, feeling small, feeling helpless, feeling like everything he loved about humanity was being stripped away, and his voice broke as he whispered, "We changed, we grew, we became better." And the Queen nodded slowly, "Yes." The memory was erased so you could evolve without the weight of war, and Ethan felt a sharp, painful tear slide down his cheek, because suddenly he realized the truth. Earth's peace wasn't natural, it was protected, built on a lie, a shield of ignorance that let humans become gentle, curious, hopeful, and that truth hurt in a way he couldn't explain, because it felt like someone had stolen humanity's innocence long before they ever knew it existed. And the Queen stepped closer, her eyes glowing with emotion he couldn't name, and she whispered, "But the enemy that ended your empire is returning, and they will not show mercy. and Ethan's heart stopped for a beat, fear crushing him. Because now the truth was clear, this wasn't about history, this wasn't about knowledge, this was about survival, and suddenly the Queen's gaze hardened, powerful and commanding. To return to Earth, you must prove humanity is ready. And the chamber floor began to shift, forming a long descending path into a dark arena below, and Ethan's breath shook violently as he stared down into the abyss, knowing he was being pushed towards something he wasn't trained for, something brutal, something ancient, and he whispered in a broken voice, "I'm just one man." But the Queen answered with a chilling certainty, "One man can awaken a species." And Ethan felt his heart crack open with fear, responsibility, and unbearable pressure. Because he didn't want to carry the fate of Earth, he didn't want to be a symbol, he just wanted to go home. But now he understood that going home wasn't simple anymore. It was tied to a test he never asked for, a destiny he couldn't refuse. And as the path lowered slowly, swallowing him in shadow, his voice trembled with one last desperate plea, "Please, don't let me fail them." Because in that moment his fear wasn't for himself, it was for Earth, for the billions of innocent people who didn't know a storm was coming, and he stepped forward, heart-breaking, into the darkness that would decide humanity's future. Ethan stepped onto the descending path, his boots echoing softly against ancient metal, and every sound felt louder than it should. Like the fortress was listening to his heartbeat, listening to his fear, and, as the shadows rose around him, swallowing the last sliver of light from above, he felt his throat tighten because he wasn't walking into a mission anymore. He was walking into judgment, into a trial meant for legends, not for a tired human who only wanted to go home. And the deeper he went, the colder the air became, a sharp cold that crawled under his skin, making him shiver not just from temperature but from the heavy realization that he was truly alone, that no one on Earth knew he was here. No one knew what he was facing, and that loneliness hit him like a punch to the chest, because for the first time in his life, he didn't even know if he would ever see Earth again, or hear a human voice again. And the thought stung his eyes with tears he refused to let fall, whispering softly to himself, "Hold on, just hold on." As if those words were the only thing keeping him standing, and finally the path opened into a colossal chamber, an arena carved from black stone and glowing veins of blue energy, stretching so wide he couldn't see the end, and the silence was so deep it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. And in that silence, the Queen's voice echoed through his mind, calm but cold, "This is the trial of survival. Pass, and humanity earns a chance to live. Fail, and Earth's fate is sealed." And Ethan's knees almost buckled because this wasn't just a test of him. It was a test of his species, a test he never agreed to carry, and he whispered, voice breaking, "Why me? Why not someone stronger? Someone trained for this?" But there was no answer, only a soft pulse of light across the arena floor, and suddenly the walls shifted, panels retracting to reveal cages, dozens of them, each one holding a creature unlike anything he had ever seen, twisted forms with claws, fangs, eyes glowing like embers in the dark, and as the cages shook, metal groaning under the weight of their fury, Ethan's chest constricted with raw terror, because he was unarmored, just human flesh and bone, against nightmares designed to kill, and panic surged through him, hot and wild, whispering in his mind that he couldn't do this, that he was going to die here, and Earth would never know why, and he stumbled back, pressing a trembling hand to his chest, feeling his own heartbeat pounding like a frightened drum. And in that moment he thought of Earth again. Sunlight, oceans, the gentle peace of a world that had no idea how fragile it really was. And that memory hurt so deeply that his eyes filled, blurring the monstrous cages before him, because he wasn't ready to lose that world, he wasn't ready to let billions die because he was too weak, and he whispered through tears, "I can't let them down," even though a part of him still felt like a terrified child in the dark. And suddenly the first cage burst open with a roar that shook the arena. A massive beast leaping forward, its body covered in armored scales, its jaws wide enough to crush him in a single bite. An instinct made Ethan run. Feet pounding across the stone floor, fear tearing through him like fire, and he could hear the creature behind him. Claws scraping, breath snarling, the sound of death chasing him. And his lungs burned, his legs shook, and he wanted to scream because he had never trained for this, never imagined facing something so brutal. And when he stumbled and fell hard onto the cold floor, pain shot up his arm, and he gasped, rolling onto his back just in time to see the creature lunging, massive, Unstoppable, and in that split second his mind flashed with images of Earth. Children playing, families eating dinner, quiet streets under warm skies. And the thought that all of that could disappear because he failed broke something inside him, shattered something soft and human, and he didn't know where the strength came from, but his body moved, pure instinct, grabbing a jagged shard of broken metal from the ground and driving it upward into the beast's throat as it collided with him, and the force of impact knocked him flat, air exploding from his lungs, but the creature collapsed beside him, twitching, blood hissing like acid across the floor, and Ethan lay there shaking violently, tears slipping down his cheeks, because he had never killed anything like this before, never felt life slip away under his hands, and it hurt, emotionally, physically, spiritually, because this wasn't who he wanted to be. This wasn't who humans were supposed to be, and he whispered through choked breath, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," not even sure who he was apologizing to, the creature, himself, or the memory of the peaceful world he loved. And as he forced himself to stand, legs trembling, heart wounded, he looked up and saw the remaining cages trembling, ready to release even worse horrors. And the Queen's voice echoed softly, not cruel, but heavy with truth. This is humanity's past, and its test. And Ethan realized with a crushing ache that survival here wasn't about strength. It was about endurance. About refusing to break, refusing to give up. And even though his whole body shook with fear and grief, he whispered, voice trembling but determined, "For Earth. I keep going, because no matter how much it hurt, no matter how afraid he was, he could not let his world die. He could not let humanity's story end here." Alone in the dark, Ethan stood in the center of the arena, his breath sharp and ragged, his hands stained with dark blood that wasn't his, and his whole body trembled as if the fear inside him was shaking him from the bones outward, and he stared at the collapsed creature beside him, its massive form finally still, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any roar, because now he could hear his own heartbeat, loud, uneven, desperate, reminding him how close he had come to dying, how close Earth had come to losing its only chance, and that thought hit him with a painful weight, making his chest tighten with a deep ache, because he didn't want to be this, didn't want to be someone who killed, someone who fought like a cornered animal, and the guilt burned through him like fire, filling his eyes with tears that blurred everything around him, and he whispered shakily, "I never wanted this. I just wanted to go home." And his voice cracked because the dream of home felt farther away than ever, like a star he could see but would never touch again, and for a moment he dropped to his knees, exhausted, broken, feeling like he was falling apart, and he pressed both hands to the cold floor, trying to steady his breathing, trying to hold himself together. But the weight of loneliness and fear pushed harder, and he felt a wave of helpless sorrow wash over him, because he was just one man, in a universe that suddenly felt too big, too cruel, too full of secrets he never asked to carry, and he closed his eyes, whispering, "Please, someone, anyone." Even though he knew no one could answer, no one could hear him across the distance between this place and Earth, no one even knew he was fighting for them, and that realization cut so deep it felt like his heart was tearing, because he wasn't just scared of dying, he was scared of dying alone, forgotten, without ever seeing the people he loved again, without ever touching Earth's soil again, and as tears slid down his cheeks, silent and hot, he felt a flicker of warmth rise in his chest, a memory, soft and unexpected. His mother's voice telling him when he was young, "Humans don't stop, Ethan. Even when they're scared," and that memory wrapped around him like a small, fragile comfort, reminding him that fear didn't make him weak, it made him human, and he wiped his face with a trembling hand, whispering, "I can't stop, not now," even though his entire body screamed for rest, for escape, for anything but more suffering. And suddenly a thunderous clang echoed across the arena as another cage began to open, its metal doors sliding apart with slow, crushing force, and Ethan staggered too. His feet, legs shaking so violently he almost fell again, and he stared at the opening cage with dread twisting in his stomach, because he didn't know what was coming next, didn't know if he could survive a second creature, and panic clawed through him again, fierce and overwhelming, whispering in his mind that he couldn't do this, that he was going to die here, and Earth would never even know why. But then something strange happened. The second cage didn't release a monster, it revealed a massive machine, a towering construct of black metal and jagged blades, its eyes glowing like burning coals, and as it stepped forward, the ground shook beneath its weight, and Ethan's fear turned cold, deeper than before, because this wasn't a beast driven by instinct. This was a weapon built with purpose, built to kill, built to test strength beyond anything human, and Ethan stumbled back, shaking his head, whispering, "No, no. I can't fight that." But the machine kept advancing, its footsteps slow, deliberate, unstoppable, and he could feel the sheer power radiating off of it. A force designed to break anything in its path, and the Queen's voice echoed softly in his mind, filled with ancient sadness. Humans once forged machines like this, and they obeyed only the strongest. And Ethan's heart shattered a little more, because every new truth twisted the knife deeper, showing him a version of humanity he didn't want to believe in, a version that made him feel ashamed, terrified, and painfully small, and he whispered through clenched teeth, "We're not like that anymore, we're better, we have to be better." But the machine didn't care about his words, didn't care about who humans were now, it only cared about one thing, destroying whatever stood before it. And as it charged, blades spinning, heat building, Ethan ran again, lungs burning, legs barely able to carry him, and he could hear the machine behind him. Faster than the beast, smarter, more relentless, and Ethan's mind raced with fear and exhaustion, thinking he had nothing left, thinking this was where it ended. But as he stumbled behind a shattered pillar, gasping for breath, something inside him flickered again. Not strength, not anger, but a strange pulse in his veins, like a spark waking up, like something ancient stirring in the deepest part of him, and the feeling terrified him. But it also filled him with a strange heat, a force that made his trembling slow, his vision sharpen, his fear twist into fierce determination, and before he could understand what was happening, he felt his muscles tighten with strength he didn't have before, strength no normal human should possess, and he whispered in shock, "What's happening to me?" His voice shaking with fear and disbelief, and somewhere above him, the Queen watched in silence, her eyes wide with something that looked almost like recognition, almost like fear of her own. And as the machine turned toward him again, blades roaring, Ethan felt that strange power pulse harder through his blood, and in that moment he understood one terrifying truth. Something inside him was waking up, something tied to humanity's forgotten past, something he didn't choose, something he didn't want, but something that might be the only thing standing between Earth and extinction. And as he stepped out from behind the pillar, eyes burning with a mix of fear and resolve, he whispered, voice breaking, "I fight for them," and he braced himself, not because he believed he could win, but because he couldn't let Earth die without trying, even if it cost him everything. Ethan stepped forward, every breath sharp and shaky, his body torn between exhaustion and that strange new strength burning in his veins. And as the massive machine stalked toward him, its blades spinning like a storm of metal, he felt fear slam into him again, raw and suffocating, because no matter what was happening inside him, he was still just a man standing in front of something built to kill entire armies, and his legs trembled, his hands shook, and for a heartbeat he almost turned to run, almost surrendered to the instinct screaming at him to survive, to escape, to live. But then the machine let out a deep vibrating roar, a sound that echoed through the arena like a promise of death, and Ethan froze, feeling that terror clawing up his spine, and he whispered under his breath, "I don't want to die. I'm not ready." And the words hit him harder than any blow, because they were honest, painfully honest, and they carried everything he'd been holding back, the loneliness, the fear, the heartbreak of being ripped away from his world, and a small tear slipped down his cheek, silent and warm, because he wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. He was fighting for his own chance to live, to go home, to feel the sun again, to hear another human voice again, and that desperate longing made his chest ache so deeply he could barely breathe, and for a second he felt that overwhelming urge to scream, to cry, to beg this nightmare to stop. But instead he clenched his teeth, wiped his face with the back of his shaking hand, and whispered, "No, I can't quit," because quitting meant Earth died, quitting meant billions paid for his fear. Quitting meant everything he loved vanished in silence, and he refused to let that happen, even if he broke in the process. The machine charged, the ground trembling under its weight, and Ethan braced himself, but the moment it reached him something impossible happened. The pulse inside his veins surged, a blast of heat tearing through his body, and suddenly his senses sharpened, the world slowing around him, and he could see every spinning blade, every spark, every drop of burning energy pouring off the machine like molten light. And his breath caught as his body moved faster than he ever had before, instinct guiding him, his arm snapping up to block a blade that should have sliced him in half, and the impact sent a shockwave up his bones. But he didn't collapse, he didn't break, he held it, and even the machine seemed to stall, its glowing eyes flickering with confusion, and Ethan stared at his own trembling hand, stunned, terrified, whispering, How did I do that?" But he had no answer, only the terrifying realization that something inside him had unlocked, something that felt ancient and wild and heavy with power he didn't understand, and he felt a rush of panic because this strength didn't feel like it belonged to him. It felt like he was borrowing something dangerous, something that could swallow him whole if he wasn't careful. The machine attacked again, harder, faster, blades clashing against his arms, sparks bursting in bright arcs, and Ethan staggered under the force, gritting his teeth, pain ripping through his muscles, and he cried out, voice raw, because even with this new strength he was still hurting, still mortal, still terrified, and every strike felt like it could break him. But he pushed back, driven by fear and love and desperation, his heart screaming that he couldn't let Earth die, couldn't let this trial end with failure, and with one final surge of raw instinct he pivoted, grabbed a spinning blade with both hands, and used the machine's own momentum to drive it crashing into the stone wall, metal shattering in a violent explosion of sparks, and the machine collapsed in a shower of broken parts, its glowing eyes flickering out like fading stars, leaving silence in its wake. Ethan fell to his knees, body shaking violently, gasping for breath as pain tore through every muscle he had, the strange power inside him dimming like a dying flame, and he hugged his arms around himself, tears spilling freely now, because the fear and shock and agony had finally broken through the wall he'd been holding, and he sobbed quietly, shoulders shaking, whispering, I don't want to be this. I don't want this power. I just want to go home. And the words hurt more than anything, because now he knew. He wasn't the same anymore. Something inside him had changed, awakened, and he couldn't shut it back down, couldn't unlearn what he'd felt, couldn't go back to being the peaceful man he once was. Then, above him, the Queen appeared, descending slowly like a ghost of starlight, her expression no longer cold or distant, but filled with something deeper, recognition, fear, sorrow, and she spoke softly, her voice trembling with emotion Ethan had never heard from her before. It has begun. And Ethan lifted his tear-streaked face, confusion and dread tangled in his chest as he whispered, What has begun? And the Queen's eyes glowed with heavy truth, her voice breaking, the awakening of humanity, and Ethan's heart stopped, a chill ripping through him, because he understood now that this wasn't just about him. Whatever had woken inside his blood belonged to every human, a legacy hidden for thousands of years, and the Queen stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. The enemy will feel this power, and they will come. And Ethan felt his whole world collapse inward, fear choking him, because Earth wasn't ready. Humanity wasn't ready. And his voice shook as he whispered. You said I could go home if I proved myself, did I? And the Queen looked at him with eyes full of unbearable sorrow and answered with a truth that shattered him. You passed the trial, but now the war begins. And Ethan's breath broke, tears flooding his eyes again, because he understood the most painful part of all. Going home did not mean safety. Going home meant bringing a storm to the world he loved, and the weight of that truth sank into his soul like a blade, leaving him trembling, lost, and terrified of what came next. Ethan stayed kneeling on the cold stone floor, his body trembling, his breath broken, his heart torn open by the Queen's words, and for a long moment he couldn't even lift his head because the weight inside his chest was too heavy, heavier than anything he had ever carried in his life, and he felt like he was sinking, drowning in a truth he didn't ask for, a destiny he never wanted, and the silence around him pressed deeper, as if the entire fortress was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do, waiting to see if he would stand or shatter. And Ethan whispered shakily, I didn't want a war. I never wanted any of this, his voice cracking with pain, because all he had ever dreamed of was peace, exploration, a quiet return home. But now his path led only into darkness, into danger, into a storm aimed directly at Earth, and the thought of that planet, blue, fragile, innocent, made his eyes burn with fresh tears, because he could almost see it in his mind, spinning quietly in space, unaware that death was already moving toward it, unaware that their fate now rested in the trembling hands of one broken man in a forgotten fortress. The Queen stepped closer, her presence calm but heavy with ancient sorrow, and she lowered her gaze as if she, too, carried a burden that stretched across centuries, and she spoke softly. You were chosen because humanity listens to the heart before the fist. That is your greatest strength. And Ethan let out a weak, bitter breath, shaking his head as tears slid down his cheeks, whispering, What strength? I'm scared. I'm lost. I killed. I changed. I'm not ready. And those words tore something inside him, because saying them out loud made the fear feel real, raw, undeniable. And the Queen's voice lowered even further, almost gentle, No warrior is ready. They only decide who they fight for, and Ethan pressed a trembling hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat hammering against his ribs, and he thought of Earth again, not as a concept, not as a mission, but as home, real and living, filled with people who laughed and cried and dreamed, people who trusted in peace, people who never imagined that an ancient enemy was rising in the shadows of the galaxy, and Ethan's breath caught with a painful sob, because he didn't know if he could save them, didn't know if he was enough, and that uncertainty cut deeper than any blade. The arena around him began to shift, the walls opening like petals of metal and light, revealing a massive chamber beyond, a cathedral of technology and star-forged machinery, and Ethan forced himself to stand, legs shaking violently, and he stumbled forward, drawn by the glow of something enormous at the center. An ancient platform rising from the ground, its surface covered in symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat, and above it floated a holographic projection of Earth, spinning slowly. Surrounded by thousands of red markers, each one representing a threat, each one moving closer, and Ethan gasped, pain ripping through him, whispering, They've already started. And the Queen nodded, her expression filled with grief. The enemy sensed your awakening. They know humanity is no longer sleeping, and Ethan felt his stomach twist in terror, because every second he stood here, Earth was slipping closer to danger, closer to invasion, closer to destruction, and he whispered brokenly, I have to go home. I have to warn them. And the Queen turned toward a towering gate of blinding white light, her voice steady but heavy, You will. The fortress holds a ship capable of reaching Earth before the enemy. But once you return, the galaxy will follow. Ethan stared at the gate, fear and longing tearing through him, because going home meant safety for his heart but danger for his world. Going home meant seeing Earth again but bringing war to its doorstep, and he felt torn in two, shattered between the need to protect and the horror of being the reason Earth was hunted, and his voice cracked as he whispered, If I go back, I'm dooming them. And the Queen stepped closer, her voice trembling with honesty. If you don't go back, Earth dies blind, and Ethan closed his eyes, tears falling freely now, because the choice was agony. Either way, his world suffered, either way, his hands were stained with the outcome, and he whispered, almost choking on the words, I don't know if I can carry this. And the Queen placed a hand over her heart, her voice filled with a quiet, ancient pain. True leaders never can, but they carry it anyway. The platform shifted, rising toward the gate, and Ethan felt the floor move beneath his feet, lifting him toward the blinding light, and panic flared inside him, raw and desperate, because this was real, this was happening. This was the moment he would leave, return to Earth not as a peaceful explorer but as a warning, as a harbinger of war, and he whispered through trembling breath, What if they don't believe me? What if humanity isn't ready? And the Queen's reply was quiet, but powerful, Then Earth will remember what it forgot. And those words chilled him to the bone, because he knew exactly what she meant. If humanity didn't choose strength, it would be forced into it, awakened by fear, shaped by necessity, pushed back into a past it never wanted to remember. The light grew brighter, surrounding him, swallowing the fortress, the arena, the Queen, and Ethan felt his heart race with a mix of terror and longing, because beyond that light was Earth, home, and he whispered one last broken plea, Please, let me protect them. And as the light pulled him forward, the Queen's final words echoed through his mind, soft and haunting, You are the first, but not the last. And then everything vanished into white brilliance, leaving Ethan suspended between fear and hope, between destiny and despair, between the world he loved and the war racing toward it. And in that blinding silence one truth settled in his soul like a wound that would never heal. Returning home was not the end.